it's a choice. Of course, all these things are a choice, and I'm a big believer in it's up to each person. But really, like I said, if you think about your potential, you've got this immense potential, and it would just be a shame to get to the end and go, wow, I only operated at 5 or 10% of my potential.
All right, hello world. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Resistance Podcast.
Yep.
I'm Connor.
And I'm Thurston.
Nailed it. Today we're gonna go, I want to take a little deep dive into metabolic health. Because as a lot of you guys will know, and some may not, when you look at mortality rates, especially in America, some of the leading things are all connected to metabolism, like diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, all these things. Some of the root causes are metabolic diseases. So we want to talk about that. We want to talk about what our potential is, how can we overcome these issues, and how can we be, healthy and reach our full potential.
That means,
What does it mean?
Absolutely.
I don't know. But first, we just want to say a shout out to our sponsor, Resistance Espresso. We're really grateful for the $100,000 sponsorship on this. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Pretty dumb. Thurston, what's the deal with this?
So funnily enough, we use that as part of our assessment. We do metabolism tests and blood pressure, all these things, body fat percentage. But the other thing that we've added in recently is the grip strength. Yeah, so this is a great tool to measure grip strength, because grip strength is a great measure, and they're showing huge associations of grip strength and things like Alzheimer's. Peter Tia talks about that, and it's another really good measure even for blood pressure. And I just saw a little video this morning. Mike Mutzel, he's really good information. I like a lot of his stuff.
Okay, sorry, it just happened. I got lost in his bicep.
Okay.
Thurston always hits a pre-show pump.
Well,
sorry,
okay.
folks. We're gonna keep going here.
But anyway, the grip strength. Are we going to cut that out?
No.
Okay.
This is amazing.
Okay. So anyway, this is a great little tool for measuring grip strength. And it's funny because he literally showed this particular device and talked about how important it is, because we tend to focus on weight and cardiovascular health, but obviously strength is such a huge thing. And this is nice because, this thing was only like $30 or whatever, and they should use this a lot in doctors' offices, because strength is a great indicator for all around metabolic health. So he was just doing it and kind of showing his grip strength. So maybe we should do this for the fun of it. It's pretty simple.
Is there, let me make sure, is there a senior citizen one that we put it on? Just kidding, sorry. Had to. He's going to beat me, so I have to get him down a notch first.
But for my age, I might do okay. But
okay.
Yeah, you literally
what are the
just
rules?
grip onto it. Now, let's see if I can...
Yeah.
We have great fun with this, and our
Hashtag
faces go
grip
red, and
strength
we're
challenge.
trying to challenge each other and stuff like that. But you're supposed to grip it like that. So 142.4. So that's not too bad.
It's pretty good.
That's my left hand, and then
The people that are listening to this on the podcast and not watching are going to be like, "What's happening?"
Oh yeah. So for those that are listening, we've got this little grip strength thing. You just put your hand in it and pull. And I'm getting 142.4 pounds on my left hand.
Do you want to do both hands?
Yeah, we may as well.
Hand?
That's I'm left-handed, so that is my
thank
stronger
God.
hand.
I was like...
So now I'll do my right hand, because it is an interesting one to see how even it is as well. So I'm getting 140.2 on my right hand. So the one thing I did notice is my left and right are very equal, because even when Mike was doing it, he got, I think, 145 on his strong hand and his right hand, but then only 118. He redid it then, 122. Wow. So there's normally quite a disparity between the two hands.
Disclaimer, I just did arms, so I might be a little fatigued, so we can just add 20 pounds to mine. I'm a little nervous on camera, as you can see.
Oh, this is fun.
No.
What'd you get? Come on, you got to show. I know you can get much more. So.
135.
Yeah, and you've got up to 150, I think, before, haven't you? So look, you're going to have off good days, bad days.
My left hand will not be as even.
Okay. Okay, how do we go? How do we do?
124.
124, yeah. So, pretty good. Normally, obviously, you do more than that. But again, it's good to do it on a continual basis because you're always going to have times where it goes up and down. But in relation to age as well, you can kind of figure out your percentile as well.
Yeah.
So I'm averaging around 140 with both hands. So I think hitting 50
So
is
you're
pretty
keeping
good.
track of that for all of our clients for the consultations and everything?
Yeah, it's a nice little measure to kind of have in there because it's a good because strength testing is pretty difficult. Like when you get into it, trying to do your 1 rep max, and you got to gradually build up, and you've got your bench press and all these things, and
There's like skill
it's
involved
fine
and-
if you're into all that and that's what you're doing, but for the average person, that's pretty cumbersome to do. So it's a nice, simple little thing you can just throw in a consultation, and it does give you a good all-around measure of health. And grip strength is a great thing to add in as part of those measurements. So
Awesome.
yeah,
There you have it. Get yourselves one. What's it called? Grip X. Yeah, they're pretty cheap online, like $30 you
get
said.
them anywhere. Yeah.
Amazing.
Pretty cool.
Cool. Well, let's dive into some metabolic health stuff. What is the metabolism? How does it work? Why do we care?
Yeah. Well, metabolic health, because it sounds like this sort of complex thing, but it's really just your health on a cellular level. So if you just think of it like your health, your internal health, how healthy your cells in your body are, that's pretty much your metabolic health. And now we're in a position where our metabolic health has taken a nosedive in the last 200 years, even more so in the last 50 to 100 years. So what does that mean? Well, so how they test it from, when they look at it from a medical perspective, there are 5 markers that they look at. They look at HDL, which is known as your good cholesterol, but again, there's more to that. Your triglycerides, and that is an important one. That's the fats in the blood. Your blood pressure.
Okay.
Your blood glucose.
Okay.
Very important. That's probably, I would kind of start there,
Yeah.
quite frankly, and then your waistline. So in particular, they're interested in the fat around the midsection,
Right.
because again, that's correlated with visceral fat, and even more importantly, the fat around the liver. Because a lot of people
Subcutaneous
have.
fat.
Well, subcutaneous fat is actually fine.
Oh, sorry,
'cause that's-
visceral fat
Yeah,
around
visceral
organs, yeah.
fat. So subcutaneous fat, like if you have fat, I mean, which is a good point to make. If you've got fat around the body, like in your legs and your hips and elsewhere, from a health perspective, that's not a big issue.
Yeah.
It's mainly just the fat around the liver in particular, which is visceral fat or your waistline. So that's another good measure to do. So when they look at all those 5 elements, if you've got 2 or more that are outside the range of normal, they consider that you have metabolic syndrome. So that's an issue. Now, interestingly, when they look at the research and the studies, and this was even pre-pandemic 2018, how many people had all 5 of those within the normal range? And that's not even optimum health, but just within the normal range of blood pressure and triglycerides and blood sugar and the waistline. Only 6.8% of people were metabolically healthy.
Wow.
So that gives you a little bit of what should be a wake-up call. I mean, we are now where literally 93% of us are metabolically not healthy. That is horrendous. And again, you got to remember 100, 200 years ago, metabolic health was not a big issue. Not a big issue. So again, when you look at things like rates of diabetes, for instance, and I think that's a good one to look at from a metabolic health perspective, because a lot of this stems from irregularities in your blood sugar. So with blood sugar and diabetes, 50 years ago, only 1% of people had diabetes, now 14%. That's 1,400% of an increase. So huge. And now millions of people are struggling with that.
I think it's really important to look at, like what was the metric? 6.8% of Americans are metabolically healthy.
Yeah.
That's scary because I think a lot of Americans think that they're actually pretty healthy, metabolically healthy. And I think it's important to look at that and be like, hey guys, like it's actually way fewer of us than we realize. You know, it's a much bigger issue.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I've been in this for 30 years now, like since I got into health and fitness in some shape or form. And I've always thought, like, even back then, I thought that the numbers and the data were really high and we're bound to wake up from this and get healthier, and in the future we'd all be healthier. That's genuinely what I thought 30 years ago. but those rates have just escalated through the roof in those 30 years. We've got so much worse. And I guess my big thing is I'd love, I mean, if I could just, click my fingers or whatever to wake people up, because I think the big issue is what happens is, because we're all in the same boat that's quite frankly sinking, you almost don't notice it.
Right.
It's just because everyone's doing the same thing and everybody's less healthy, we just sort of accept that as normal, because it is normal. Now, it's not natural, but it's normal. But so if you take a step back and look at it, like as human beings, like in our latest incarnation of Homo sapiens, we've been on, like, that's 200,000 years, 200,000 years, where we didn't have rates of diabetes and obesity, not even remotely to the levels that we have today. So but if you could wake up from that and go, whoa, what's going on? Because the way I would see it is, like, everyone has the potential for incredible health, like amazing health. And we have the know-how today. I mean, it's kind of funny in that time, like our health and happiness has diminished dramatically in the last 100 years, and yet technology has increased. We have more information and access to more things than we've ever got before. Like, it's incredible, the world that we live in. It's almost like, again, 100 years ago, if you talked about what's available today, like our cell phones and Wi-Fi, and we could just ask our phones anything we want, and we can get information from anywhere.
AI make us a workout
all
program
around the world. Like, it's magic. Yeah. So it's like just magic, but yet we've sort of forgotten ourselves in the process.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's, I guess, my kind of biggest thing. It's like I see people, and it's like, it's almost like waking up out of a nightmare. I was going to say dream, but almost like a nightmare.
A fever dream.
It's funny, and I don't know if we can put a little clip into the video of this.
I bet we can.
But I always think of this old movie. It's hilarious. Such a B movie. I think it was like in the 70s or something, called They Live.
Okay.
And it's this guy, and I know it's like an alien apocalypse type movie or whatever, but he puts on these glasses, and then suddenly he can see reality. So he sees all the advertisements and stuff like that. And when he puts on the glasses, it just says, like, consume and obey and, do what
I always think about the movie WALL-E, with just like the people like floating around in their chairs, like being given like more Slurpees to drink, and that's scary.
Yeah, that's a brilliant, that was such a good little clip that they put together, and that really illustrated the direction that we're going in. Kind of scary, but again, that's unfortunately the rate that we're going. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I want to kind of split it up, because the first message I'd love to get across to people is that, look, you've got this incredible potential, and you don't want to get to the end of your life going, wow, yeah, you lived your life at, 5% of your potential. Like, that would be, what? Yeah. You would hate to think that.
Yeah.
But if you could wake up out of that, and it's going to be something that you have to sort of, make changes if you want to reach your potential. But that's the kind of biggest thing. It's that loss of human potential. Like, even on an individual basis, when I see people, I'm like, no, you don't have to accept this, because people just accept it. Oh, yeah, I've got this, I've got that, but I take a pill for this, and I've got all these medications, and I just have all these metabolic health conditions, and that's just normal. The doctor just goes, that's...
Well, I was going to say, it's so normal, and people don't know what they're missing. Could you give us a teaser of, like, what could it be? Like, what is the potential? What are we missing out on that we don't realize?
Yeah. Well, funny enough...
Is it just extra energy? Is it, like, what do you think?
Oh, my gosh.
Like, what could people look forward to if they were able to have good metabolic health?
I'd love to have a machine or something where you could just instantly experience the difference between having, like, really good health.
Yeah.
Where, like, you're super fit, you're super strong, you're mentally really kind of good focus, concentration, mood levels, like all your metabolic health is operating at a good level. So a couple of things that I always think about when it comes to that. One is, funny enough, the early explorers, when they came to America, and how they described the natives here, it almost seems supernatural. I always think of Avatar. It's almost like describing something that's like supernatural, because they said that the people here were, first of all, they were much taller, because back then, this is obviously going back a few hundred years, Europeans were only like 5'2", 5'4" in stature.
Short kings.
Yeah, they're a lot shorter. And when they came over here, the natives here were like 6 feet to 6'6".
Wow.
Some even like could have been as close to 7 feet tall. Like much taller, but really well built, very lean, and endless energy. They couldn't believe it, because they would literally be running after buffalo or hunting all day long and seem to have endless energy, like non-stop. And not only would they have this kind of endless energy, but then they'd have like really good strength. And they would be able to run alongside buffalo at the same speed. Like, so they could sprint incredibly fast, and of course jump on and hunt, and you know, and that just seems like I couldn't imagine doing that myself.
No.
I mean, it just seems like supernatural. But there's an amazing, my favorite book of all time when it comes to nutrition is actually the one that we have back there, called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And that was by a dentist called Weston A. Price, and he traveled around the world, and he was actually a dentist, so he was interested in how did a lot of people that seem to be, you know, so-called primitive have like no dental cavities and great teeth, you know? And then he realized not only that, but all across the board in terms of health, their health was phenomenal. They were healthy and happy all the time, even though they could be in remote areas where it seemed pretty harsh conditions and living a very basic life, but they were healthier, way healthier and happier than the Western world. And he explains all of that the nutrient density was through the roof, and they prized that, and things like everything from cod liver oil to whatever, but they were big into nutrient density, and obviously didn't have any ultra-processed food. We talked about that last week when we talked about a little bit about the weight loss and how ultra-processed food plays that role. But when it comes to metabolic health, again, that's a huge, huge component. So yeah, I mean, you're going to have to stop me going into the woods here, but I really just think that people have this immense potential, and if they knew it, and honestly, and I want to really outline everything as much as we can to give them steps to get there, because it really is possible, and it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to be like some weird fanatic. Like, anybody can tap into this, but there is a bit of a structure to it, and if you can understand it, you can have an incredible, fulfilling, happy, long life.
And that doesn't necessarily mean having an 8-pack and 7% body fat and being jacked and living in the gym. That's not what this means.
Not at all.
We're just talking about being metabolically healthy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Feeling younger, having more energy, more motivation.
Yeah. Because I mean, even like rates of depression and anxiety and stress and all of these things, and even for kids, through the roof. And it's horrible to think, like, even kids now are having all these, they used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset, but now huge percentage, like I should know these numbers off the top of my head, but I mean, you're talking like between 15 to 30% of kids with obesity and diabetes, or loads of them are pre-diabetic. And those rates have jumped up a lot recently. So yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is like, wow, here we are, we've got this immense potential to have an incredible, healthy, you know, long, fulfilling life, but very few of us are even touching off close to that potential. And the implications of this, both on a personal and societal level, is huge, huge. So
wow. Well, let's talk about it. We've talked about what we can look forward to a little bit and the potential. Let's talk about how we get there, and what's keeping us from getting there.
Sure.
Do you want to go through maybe those 5 things that you laid out earlier? Do you want to talk about the blood glucose and these different components, or? Yeah.
I'll touch off some of those things, and you know, we'll just see where it takes us.
Sure.
But, so yeah, I mean, I'm back and forth on this, but I think it is worth talking about just even more recently what we went through with the pandemic. Because unfortunately, and I actually, you know, there's a video which I'm sure we can link to. even very early on, I was only 2 months in, that I sort of tried to get the message out there. I just released a video about how we should really be looking at our metabolic health.
Right.
I mean, it seems like a logical thing, because even when it came to the pandemic, clearly it was affecting people that weren't metabolically healthy, much more so. So both from the point of view of age, so we know that obviously for teenagers it was tiny numbers in terms of severe illness or death compared to people in their 70s and 80s. It was huge numbers. And
the question's why?
Well, I mean,
you're getting into,
and that's the thing, because I mean, the virus doesn't come along and go, "Hey, what age are you?"
Exactly.
So it doesn't know.
That's what people kind of think, though. They're like, "Oh, I'm young, I'm good."
Like,
well.
So it really, the difference is your metabolic health, because obviously you're going to be metabolically much healthier as a teenager in your 20s compared to when you're in your 70s or 80s.
Why we get more of these diseases as we get older, because our metabolic health is declining.
So that was unfortunate, because it just didn't seem to become any part of the messaging that, look, and this video I did very early on, that was even before vaccines or anything like that, but just, wow, it's more important to take care of our health. But unfortunately, the opposite happened. So even back then, I talked about the data and stats, and they came true fully. In other words, like, we ended up doing 50% of exercise. So we basically exercise, and most people weren't exercising enough anyway. But then during the pandemic, that dropped in half. And then our consumption of ultra-processed food went through the roof. They called it comfort foods.
We put on that.
So that increased.
The pandemic 20.
And in the data and stats so far, it looks like the average person gained about 15 pounds.
Wow.
Now, some people gained obviously a lot more, 40, 50, 60 pounds during that time period. But even that average 15 pounds, and look, weight is just weight. It's not about just weight. It's about what is it that caused that could be hurting your metabolic health. Because and this is like studies from National Institute of Health, but they're showing that the rates of obesity and diabetes obviously jumped up dramatically during those few years. In fact, like you're talking about 77 to 300% increase, and this is for kids. For obesity and diabetes. So huge increase during that time period.
Which is only putting you at more risk for
So
try not to say it, because I feel like we're going to get taken offline.
Well, I mean, look, I don't think this area is even controversial, that obviously our metabolic health is important. We're not going into all the other things, but unfortunately, the whatever happened, whether it's the stress or the lockdowns, or kids not being able to play with their friends and exercise, whatever the reasons and whatever your beliefs or whatever, our metabolic health obviously is important. And my kind of big fear is, and I've said this even back then, is that I know how hard it is to reverse these things, because we've been working with people for decades, and we'll go through that, because it takes a lot to change your metabolic health. So, and even in these studies with the National Institute of Health, they said, look, this is going to become a lifelong issue for these kids. They're going to have a lot more, like millions more are now going to have obesity and diabetes for their whole lives. Millions more. That's horrendous. And the even rates of depression and anxiety and all these things as well. So they're unfortunately set up for, not a great future unless we do something about it and turn it around. So that's where I think, wow, here's this thing that came along, and we all took tremendous action. And I, for the vast majority of it, I think was a very positive. In other words, we wanted to do something to save people's lives. We cared about people and their health. I think underlying, like, before we get into, I don't even want to get into all the, like, it became so, there was no nuances.
Political.
And it was, which should be just about science and trying to find the best way forward. But unfortunately, anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Video.
But it is important, because I do think, metabolic health should always be part of the discussion. Absolutely. Like, I mean, what's the downside of exercising more, eating healthier?
Yeah.
Because then at least when this happens, and there's huge, direct, very good science and research to show, for instance, just something like blood sugar, blood glucose levels, that will actually dictate, first of all, whether or not you're going to get it infected, the severity of it, and the deaths very much related to metabolic health issues. And we know that on average, I think people had 4 comorbidities. 95% of people that died had 4 comorbidities. So if we had, in conjunction with whatever else, had improved people's metabolic health, I think we would have seen much better outcomes. Like, I don't see how that's an
Yeah, I don't
issue.
think people understand the correlation. Like, why does metabolic health put them at a greater risk for these sort of, whatever, COVID? What's happening there? Why is it putting them more at risk?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a simple way, if you just think about whenever you get some kind of stress on the body. So stress can come in the form of lots of things, but in this case, obviously, you get an infectious disease, and that's a stress on the body. So how healthy your cells are is going to dictate how you fare out. So again, I don't think most people think, yeah, if you're younger and you're healthier, you're probably going to survive more than if you're older and you've got other comorbidities. So I don't think that's a huge stretch to understand that, of course, your health is going to be a huge component in that. And again, the data and the research comes true on that. So even, like I said, just something as simple as your blood sugar levels. So when your blood sugar and insulin is out of your A1C levels are high and your blood glucose is high, it sets up your whole system. Then is, you get a lot more inflammation, and you're literally setting up an environment that's much easier to get infections and for those to spread and to do more damage. So it's just, again, your health on a cellular level. So even things like exercise improves, and this is just goes throughout all infectious disease, colds, flus, everything. That if you're obviously healthier and your lungs are better, your VO2 max is better, all these things, and obviously you're going to fare out much, much better.
Yeah.
So it just plays a huge, huge role. And I, like I said, I'm not even going to get into all the other things, but it should have been front and center, along with whatever else.
It should have been. It's not surprising, though, that it's not. When you look at the world and you look at our country and how we're dealing with these things already, it's like, why would we think that people that, the powers that be would say, hey guys, eat better and exercise? Because it already seems like that's not what they want to tell us to do anyways. They want to tell us to take a pill. Here's the fix.
Yeah.
Here's the vaccine, or here's the thing, instead of doing the work to make you healthier. So before we move on, can you just give us a really quick, brief overview of metabolic health? What is it? And then let's go into how can we start to fix that.
Sure.
And get healthier.
Okay. So again, simple thing, metabolic health is just your health on a cellular level. So it's really your internal health. And like I said, in how they assess this from a medical perspective, that those 5 components, you've got your waistline, because they're looking at visceral fat. You've got your blood pressure. You've got your blood glucose, your HDL, which is known as your good cholesterol, a bit more to that, and then your triglycerides and the fats in the bloodstream. So using that as a framework then, there's obviously a lot of things that we can do to improve all of those factors. So they're just kind of helpful markers to look at.
Got it.
And of course, there's lots of other ones.
So we can kind of start pinpointing each of those different markers to start to improve our metabolic health.
Yeah. Now, I would start with blood glucose, because that one has such a knock-on effect on everything else. So when the blood glucose, when that starts to get worse, then it has a knock-on impact on all these other things like triglycerides. So when your blood sugar level is high, you're more likely to have elevated levels of triglycerides.
Okay.
And then, of course, blood pressure as well can be related to blood sugar. And then when over time, when your blood sugar and insulin are out of balance, we talked about this in the weight loss, that can also equate to excess fat, in particular visceral fat and what they call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, because that's a huge issue. So all these things is kind of your metabolic health. So
can we start there with blood glucose, if that's okay? Can you just explain what is blood glucose? Imagine no one's ever heard the word glucose, or they don't know it's how it works. What is blood glucose? Why is too much of it bad? What's like the chain reaction going on there? And then I think once we understand that, we can kind of start talking about how we fix that issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. So blood glucose, or that's the technical term, but a lot of people just call it blood sugar. And that is basically the level of sugar in your blood. So when you consume something, like say you consume sugar, like that's just the easiest thing.
Keep it simple,
Now, sugar technically is 50% glucose, 50% fructose, but it's just sugar. So if I just took a big bowl of sugar, then my blood sugar levels are going to rise. So it's digested quickly because it's a processed food, and it's going to elevate my blood glucose pretty high. So even for healthy people, there's a certain point that you're not going to be able to keep your blood sugar under control if you take 100 grams.
And that sugar is getting into your blood to get transported out throughout the body. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's going to be transported to your cells. Generally, glucose is for energy, and we need glucose, otherwise we'd be dead.
Totally.
Your brain needs it, your body needs it. Okay, there's this other fuel, which is ketones, and that can help offset, but you always need a certain
amount. We'll do a podcast on that.
And we're not going to go too much into the weeds, but simply put, let's just say you take in sugar, then your blood sugar level rises. Now, if you only take in a small amount, or you take it in conjunction with other food, and you just get gentle rises and gentle lows, that's fine. That's the body's meant to do that. It'll elevate for a little bit, and then it'll drop down. But I mean, the elevations and drops are going to be all within a very small range. So if you take too much, you get this. And look, I'm going to oversimplify and use analogies just to try to illustrate the points. And if you want to really get the more technical stuff, we can link to Dr. Robert Lustig as he goes into this in more details, Dr. Peter T. There's lots of people that if you want to go more in depth, but just on a simple basis, you take too much excess blood sugar, excess blood glucose, and that can be different for each person, and we can talk about that. But you take that, now you get this spike of blood sugar, so it jumps up to 180, 200 plus. And it's like overwhelming for the body. And what the body needs to do is a hormone called insulin. And that insulin then will increase in the body, because what insulin does, it helps to get the sugar out of your blood, because if you have too much, it's like hyperglycemia. You can literally, it's way too much for the body. So as a protective mechanism, the insulin will elevate, and then it'll store that blood sugar into the cells.
Yeah, I've heard you say before, it's like the key to the cell.
Yeah. So it's going to then push the blood sugar into the cells. But when this keeps happening, you get these peaks and troughs. So when you get this blood sugar high, I mean, it's like if you give them a little bit of sugar, 20, 30, 40 minutes later, they're running around frantically because their energy levels are higher.
Oh, yeah.
So they get this but they're sort of that frantic energy for too much blood sugar, and then they're running around and they're crazy. And then, of course, then the blood sugar drops because it's an artificial high, and then it drops really quickly, and then you've got excess insulin in the system, and that's where you feel the crash. And then your levels go bump, and you feel kind of lethargic and not so good.
Yeah.
So, then the kids are crying and want to go home, so they get this kind of frantic energy, then bump, it drops, and then they feel bad, and then they're crying and whatever. So you can really see it with kids in particular, because they're kind of new to it. Then over time, we become a little bit more desensitized, whatever. To it. So, and then we develop what's called insulin resistance.
Right.
So now it's like too much, and over time, you're just not going to be as sensitive to the blood sugar, and then
So your insulin's you're not secreting as much insulin as you need.
Yeah.
to get the glucose where it needs to go.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And when you get into obviously severe diabetes, then because you end up with insulin sensitivity, and then you end up diabetic, and you can't get the blood sugar under control. And then what happens is, they might give you metformin or something, which can help, and then they give you shots of insulin if it's, because generally this keeps getting worse because they're not addressing the underlying issue, so it keeps getting worse. They're taking insulin then, and insulin is like keeps pushing the sugar into the cells, but then those cells, the sugar in those cells, rot the cells.
Right.
So it's literally like rotting the body.
It up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, over time then, and your feet and hands and stuff, they can become like literally.
It oxidizes, right?
Yeah, they're rotten, and they unfortunately then end up having to get amputations and stuff like that. So that's the progression of those types of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a simple thing. You're going to get these peaks and troughs in blood sugar, but just even on a day-to-day basis, when you are in that state, your energy levels are all over the place. And again, it's almost, most people, the average person would say, yeah, does your energy peak and trough throughout the day? Go, yeah, it kind of goes up, and then mid-morning it drops again. I need a coffee, it gets me through to lunchtime, and then I'm fine. But then in the afternoon, everyone's asleep at the office, 3 o'clock. So most people are experiencing this, and while it's normal, it's not natural.
Yeah.
And when you say to people, well, actually, you should have really good, steady energy throughout the day and feel really good and not have those peaks and troughs, they're like, really? Yeah. And once you then obviously change up and cut out the ultra-processed foods and have more natural foods, they start, wow, this is great. My focus is better, my concentration is better, my mood levels are better, I feel great. So even starting there and getting your blood sugar under control, I think is a brilliant, brilliant starting point.
Yeah, so how do we do that? Obviously, there's a food and eating component, and then there's, of course, a exercise component.
Yeah.
And activity component, I guess we could say.
Yep.
What can we do to mitigate the risks of,
Sure. Yeah. Well, the first thing, which I'm always going to say, is reduce the ultra-processed foods. So, because that's generally the foods that are the highest in sugar and processed grains and flours that elevate the blood
spikes
sugar.
it so much.
Spike them a lot.
Taps the insulin button too much. Okay.
Exactly. So, reducing that is a huge component of that, and then taking more foods that help to regulate your blood sugar. So that will be like, for instance, protein is very good at that. So protein, the way it's broken down, you can break down protein into glucose, called gluconeogenesis, but it's broken down at a way slower rate, so you're not going to get these huge spikes. And then fat doesn't elevate your blood sugar at all. So it's really the carbohydrates that you have to watch the quality of the carbohydrates. Now, this is where the whole low carb and keto comes in, because they reduce carbs way down, and then you can really cause your blood sugar levels to steady out very quickly, reduces your insulin surges and stuff like that. So that can be, if you're into that. But you'll see triglycerides drop, for instance, really considerably when you do that. Now, I'm not, necessarily advocating that. These are all just, tools in the toolbox that can be useful for certain people at certain times, but just generally reducing ultra-processed foods, consuming a lot more natural foods, so like protein and fiber are two things that's going to really help steady your blood sugar. Also, we talked before about this, but the order that you eat your foods. So when you eat your protein and fibers first, so like your vegetables and proteins, and then the carbs, your blood sugar will be much steadier compared to if you eat like bread at the beginning of a meal. That's going to spike up your blood sugar way more.
Yeah, we have a lot more on that in the last podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
You talked about energy levels and the spikes and drops and mountains and valleys of energy. Can you talk really quick about the correlation between blood glucose issues and then fat storage also, and how that works? Yeah. Well,
we definitely went into this in more detail in the last podcast on weight loss, but so insulin is also known as the fat storing hormone. Now, I want to clarify excess insulin. Like insulin is a two-edged sword. You need insulin. Insulin is great, does so many good things for the body. But excess insulin. So because of this imbalance, then we have too much insulin, that then can become the fat storing hormone.
Right.
So insulin definitely drives that up. So if you just and Dr. Robert Lustig, he talks about this, like if you just inject, and people know this that are on insulin, the more insulin they take, the more weight they put on.
Right.
So it's super clear. So talk to someone who takes insulin and they will say, they try to take less. And it's actually a problem, especially with younger people with diabetes, because they don't want to put on weight. They want to look a certain way. They're more into their looks when you're younger. So then they won't be taking their required doses, and then that could be a problem if they're extremely diabetic, etc. So insulin, definitely the fat storing hormone, too much of that, that's where the correlation comes in.
Yeah, so say I eat 100 calories of a low glycemic food and then I eat 100 calories of sugar. My likelihood of, I'm going to store more of that sugar, or I'm going very simple here, I'm going to store more of that high glycemic food as fat because it's spiking my insulin so much, is that correct?
Yeah.
The more you spike it, the more likelihood there is to store it away as fat.
Yeah. Now,
I know, it's very
big,
simple
huge,
terms.
complex thing, but yeah, in simple terms, the outcome will be that because the person will then also be hungry, they'll probably consume extra calories. There's all these other things that go on there, but yeah, I think you could say that. I do think you could say that, because for sure you're more likely to store fat when your insulin levels are higher. So whatever's in there is going to more likely get stored as fats. That's just the way it is, for sure. And it'll probably slow up your metabolism too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would definitely say that. But I mean, just going back to metabolic health, because again, you can have a few extra pounds or whatever, and I don't want to focus too much on weight loss because we covered that. But from a health perspective, you really just don't want to constantly have that excess pressure on the body of that imbalance. Now, one of the things that I have worked a lot with people is to kind of really help them improve their health. A lot of people get these continuous blood glucose monitors. That is something that I actually would think could make a big difference if these things became almost ubiquitous. I mean, I don't know if Apple have something in the works, or
that'd be awesome.
Where you could have this continuous blood glucose monitor, where it just becomes another measure of health, because we've got all these sensors from everything from heart rate to things like temperature and all these things, which are great, and they calculate VO2 max and all these things. So it's great to have control of all these things. And I do think that if people really could see what it is that's causing, blood sugar spikes that are beyond outside the normal, and that they could see what's creating that, automatically they'll start to have much better behaviors. And I've seen that with a lot of people that use these continuous blood glucose monitors.
So that's a great tool to kind of add into the toolbox.
Absolutely,
just to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and you can just, look, you can go into the pharmacy over the counter, get one of the ones with the finger.
Yeah, the finger prick.
Yeah, and you just check that an hour or two after your meal, and you can see how much it's elevated. I think that can be a very useful tool, because everybody's different. And this is a big thing where when you look at what's out there and you see, okay, this food is supposed to be good or not good or whatever, and what I love about this is an objective measure of what's happening to you and your body. The problem with research, and even glycemic index and all things, they're all averaged out.
Yeah.
But you can have two people, like we could both eat, let's say, the exact same meal, and let's just say there's rice in the meal. And one of us could spike and react to that a lot more than the other person. And then it could be the opposite with ice cream, right?
Sure.
So we could both have ice cream, and maybe mine will spike and yours won't, and then vice versa. So it is very individual. It's based on your genetics, it's based on your microbiome, obviously your level of health, how much muscle tissue you have. All of these things are going to play a role. But there's still this huge individual reaction to these things. And then there's other lifestyle factors. For instance, one time I had it on, and I had a breakfast or whatever, and I was looking at the rise, and one night I only got 4 hours of sleep. The other night I had the full 8 hours sleep. And the blood sugar rise was double when I only had 4 hours of sleep. So sleep is a huge component. And if you're not sleeping well, you're under stress, that will have a big role to play on your metabolic health and your blood sugar response.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. So there are all these other lifestyle factors. So But if I was to kind of put it together, definitely nutrition number one.
Yeah.
From that perspective on blood sugar, and cutting out the ultra processed food, taking more natural foods, so fibers, proteins, a lot of vegetables.
Because we just don't want to take those carbs and sugars by themselves, right?
Yeah.
We want to have the fiber there and stuff to
exactly
slow it
slows down the absorption. Because in nature, it's almost impossible to find something that would spike your blood sugar really high. I always do
2
this
pounds of berries or something.
Well, you need a colossal
Yeah.
amount, yeah, and then the amount of fiber in that. And again, naturally, we just
exactly.
wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
We would have consumed it amongst other foods. So very hard to find anything in nature. Now, people will always say, "Oh, what about honey?" Yeah, but again, in nature, are you going to run up to a beehive and get stung? Like, it's
No.
you're probably not. So it's very hard in nature when you really go back to a natural diet that you're going to have these issues.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. And funny enough, I mean, just before we kind of wrap that up, I mean, diabetes is bankrupting like nations all over the world. I mean, China looks like it's really going to be under serious economic issues because of because diabetes is a very expensive disease. Like 80% of the cost of healthcare, and now we're up to, I think, last time I checked, it's probably even higher now, but $3.3 trillion a year on healthcare in this country. And 80% of that is on metabolic health issues.
Wow.
So if we could just have people be healthier, get their blood sugar under control, obviously eat healthier, exercise, all like simple things. Again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. All we got to do is go back in time, go back 100, 200 years before we had all these issues. So it's not this weird, we got to come up with this new solution. We just got to go back in time almost.
Yeah.
And that could absolutely transform the country and the world as we know it. I mean, that's
crazy.
That's the whole thing where I'm like, wow, this is not that difficult. We could have an amazing life and be healthier and happier than we've ever been on the planet. We've got the capacity. We've got everything we need. But I do think it takes a bit of waking up and going, whoa. I would just say to people, even on an individual basis, wow. I mean, if I said you're only, like, again, it doesn't quite work like this, but let's just say, that research, only 7% of people, 6.8 are metabolically healthy. So let's just say you averaged everything out. That means we're only operating at 7% of our potential,
Sure.
So imagine, if I could say, well, you could have 10 times your health and feel great every day and have endless energy, concentration, mood levels. Because even your mood and depression, of course, is a psychological component. But again, especially when you look at the data and stats and what's causing these increases, and et cetera, it's a lot of it is metabolic health as well, because even blood sugar is related to that as well. So all these things are kind of related to metabolic health. So you could look and feel and just have endless energy and strength. And of course, I recommend Dr. Peter Attia's book because he outlines this really well, that potentially a lot of people genetically have the potential to reach 100 in a healthy way. Because he talks about it, he talked about the centenarian decathlon, and where he goes, well, at 100, I want to have a good, because a lot of people think, oh my God, I don't want to live that long because
it'll be miserable.
It would be a miserable life.
Yeah.
But it's a difference between health span and lifespan.
Exactly.
But I think, wow, we've got the potential for a lot of people to get up into their 90s, even 100, in a healthy way and still be able to get on the ground, play with your grandkids, go for hikes. And he has all these things and he kind of reverse engineers everything. But he outlines, look, metabolic health, certain amount is inevitable, but you can really prevent and offset so much of that. And he outlines it beautifully in the book. So first thing I did is I sent it to my parents. I recommended it, given it to loads of our members here, because he just really outlines all the things you need to watch, even that you get tested. But again, big into metabolic health. Yeah. Because they're the big things he talks about: blood sugar, blood pressure, dementia, and cancer. And he was a cancer surgeon.
The 5 horsemen, the 4 horsemen of death or something.
Yeah. And how you can really take control of those things. And of course, he's big into exercise. That's his first foremost intervention. He talks even about drugs. He talks about all these and nutrition.
He does.
And obviously we talked about nutrition, so maybe, I don't know, we could segue into exercise
We
as
definitely
well.
can, yeah.
Yeah. So,
because so much of this is it's an overeating issue and an underactivity issue.
yeah.
Right, and they both play a key role, in metabolic health. So let's do that. I mean, let's talk about how exercise. I was going to go through. It's like, because we could talk about how exercise effectively. Or sorry, I'm messing this up. We can cut this out. But I was going to talk about how exercise can help with each of them: hypertension, blood glucose, and it kind of does something separate. But how do we keep this without going on 3-hour tangents?
Sure, yeah.
Not on your part, but I mean on my part, because we could break it down and talk about each of the different components and how exercise and nutrition affects them.
Yeah.
Or do we just want to talk more generally?
Well, I mean, so just going back step by step, because I'd love for people to kind of see that there's absolutely a really clear pathway that they could take and genuinely see a huge difference in their day-to-day life. Because I think that's the biggest thing. People think of health as, oh, I've either got a disease or I don't. I have to take medication or I don't, or these progressive diseases. But these things impact your day-to-day quality of life hugely. And that, quite frankly, to me is number one. Because, I mean, who wants to, again, like that idea of living till 100 if you're going to be miserable and can barely move, you have no mobility, no energy, and you've got all these health conditions. But if you said, well, imagine being like the average 40-year-old at 80, then you go, well, now I'm happy to add on some extra years. But your quality of life, that like you wake up in the morning and how you feel, and you feel like full of energy and very positive and focused, and you just have endless stamina and extra energy. Because I always think, like, a big thing that we do is make sure people's metabolisms improve, so their energy levels. So just super quickly, again, on a cellular level, how much mitochondria is inside the cells and the quality of that, that's your energy system. And that's a huge thing to do with your metabolic health. So when you can do that, then your day-to-day, you will just literally, your cells are energized, all of them are activated, and you feel fantastic. And your whole quality of life is going to jump up dramatically. Like so many people that we've worked with say, wow, I just felt so good. And it even led me to getting a promotion at work because I was more productive and I was more confident, and all of these things. The knock-on effect is huge, absolutely huge. So that's where I'm always like, I see people, and it's like that, going back to that they live, you put on the glasses and you can see the reality. I see people as walking around having this amazing potential to be so much healthier and happier. And I don't think they're even aware of that. That if they knew that, I think they would absolutely make these changes and start to experience that. So
well, I think that's what we should get into. How do we make those changes? And obviously we know food, and we know, I think we talked about, let's stop spiking the blood glucose and the insulin like crazy with these super high sugary foods. How does exercise play into it? Like, let's get into it. Let's talk about how it affects the mitochondria, how that affects the metabolism. And let's just do the whole thing.
Cool.
Exercise and metabolic health.
Yeah, and just to kind of set this up, because a lot of people, when you don't have good metabolic health, people, they don't feel like exercising because in that moment, their energy levels are lower. So, and then when they do a bit of exercise, it feels terrible because they probably have a lot of inflammation in their body. So then they get put off and they go, wow, I don't want to. And then they sort of go, well, that's not a nice feeling. And then they think, well, if I have to do that for the rest of my life, it's not worth it. I'm happy to, not do that.
Surrender.
But what people don't understand is just stick with it just for a little bit, and very quickly that will change. So even after a few weeks, and so many people we work with who've never worked out before find this, that at first they're like, the first workout or two, they're like, whoa, that didn't feel nice, and I got all this inflammation and stuff like that. But then after a couple of weeks, they feel great. So with exercise and metabolic health, there's really sort of two forms of exercise. One is what people think of cardio, or really what I like to talk about, true aerobics.
Yeah.
And then the other is strength training. So from a cellular level, if you look at all the muscle cells in the body, because that's the active cells in the body. So fat doesn't really do much, but it's the muscle cells that's going to give you the energy and your metabolic health. So the more of those cells that you have optimized for the mitochondria, so the healthier all those cells are, the better. And then even, quite frankly, you won't need to be as strict on a diet, for instance. Because I mean, someone like Michael Phelps could eat a colossal amount of sugar and carbs and it'd be no problem. He'll just chew it up as energy and his metabolic health will be fine.
Yeah.
Because he's this incredible athlete, but all his cells are alive and working. So if you just think about it, your body has, half of it is what's called type 1 or slow twitch muscle fiber, and the other half is type 2 or fast twitch. So just very simply, we've two very distinct energy systems, and we have a whole thing in our masterclass about this. So really, when it comes to exercise, if you can get both of those energy systems going, oh my gosh, your health will be phenomenal. And all of those things that we're talking about, all those metabolic health factors, improve dramatically. So obviously with the aerobics or the type 1 muscle fiber, a lot of it is just movement.
Yeah.
It's more about not being stagnant than anything else. So getting your steps in, ideally kind of walking, hiking and stuff like that. And I would say don't overdo the intensity of aerobics, because once you go over a certain level, and we'll do another thing about that, it doesn't work as well. But that's super simple. Like, get your steps in throughout the day. Really simple thing to do. If you can go for faster walks, even better. And there's a particular zone that we talk about, Peter T talks about zone 2, the Maffetone system. You know, I talked about this like 10, 15 years ago. Primal endurance, there's all these things anyway, but just fast walk level, if you can do that, 30 minutes, a few times a week, fantastic, and you'll get that whole energy system going.
And that's
really
that's
well.
not we're not when we're doing that, we're not talking about get out there and walk because that's the best way to burn calories. We're talking about it's about activating the type 1 muscle fibers.
Yeah, just think about it, optimizing half the muscle in your body, all those fibers, you really want to activate those cells, the mitochondria. Just think of it like that. And then all of those are now working and active.
Yeah.
Like, one of the worst things that you can possibly do is just be completely sedentary. I mean, they did some research in this, and they have to stop it because it's so unethical. But like bed rest, if you just literally, and obviously people in hospitals experience this, but even after a week to 10 days, oh my gosh, your strength drops in like 30-40%, your metabolism drops, your blood pressure goes up, your blood gets thicker and gooier. It's awful.
Your aerobic capacity also goes down so fast.
Yeah, but you're talking about like 10 days, a week to 10 days, and these dramatic numbers. But that's interesting because then maybe the reverse is true. So in other words, just even 2 weeks where you start to be more active. Because I do find this, and this is something I want to get across, and something that you're not going to hear much of because it's more of an experience thing when you're working with a lot of people and experiencing yourself, is that, look, the first few days it may feel uncomfortable, but just stick with it. There's this little curve that then by day 5 or 6, and you add in those, then you feel like, oh yeah, I could walk almost for hours and I don't feel bad. So just, be mindful of that look, the first few days, if it doesn't feel good, just stick with it for a little, not months or years, just like a few extra days. You'll get over that hump and then you'll feel much better. So it's just the process of activating those cells. Initially, it can feel worse before it gets better, but then once you get over that hump, and it's not that bad, and then you'll feel fantastic. So that's that whole kind of mode of that part. And then the second part of exercise is then the strength training. And that's all the type 2 muscle fibers.
Yeah.
Now that to me is even more interesting because that's the type of muscle we lose as we age.
Yes.
So we lose 3 to 8% of our muscle mass every decade from about the age of 35, 40.
And that's why our metabolisms are just doing this.
They can do, yeah.
One of
they
the
don't have
reasons.
to, but so that's a huge, I mean, it is a huge reason why. So it's not necessarily from aging, but it's from the fact that we're losing muscle as we're aging.
Age, yeah.
It doesn't have to be like that.
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah. So But that muscle loss then will slow down your metabolism. You'll have a lot less energy, a lot less mobility, all of those things. So the strength training is fantastic because you need very little time and get an incredible boost in your energy and metabolic health. So that's I always kind of start there, and that's why we're very passionate about resistance training, because we want to make it so easy for people. Because it's for most people, it's intimidating, cumbersome to go in and all these weird contraptions, machines. And obviously we try to simplify that at Resistance, because that's the bit that most people are missing. Because most people will do some form of exercise, and it could be just going for a walk, a run, a cycle, a swim, because it's all easy enough to do that. But then the strength training is where most people are missing, and they're missing out on such an incredible boost in their quality of life. Like, I mean, huge, where you just feel fantastic and you have this incredible energy and boost, and it's much easier to keep your blood sugar under control and all of these things by activating all the type 2 muscle fibers. And then you can have, there's much more scope to increase the mitochondria in that. Because the type 1 is already very mitochondrial dense. So it's good to keep that going and active. But the strength training, you'll see much bigger difference much faster. So like even within a few weeks, you'll notice a huge increase, obviously, in your strength, but also, again, your energy and your metabolic health. So I love helping people with that part. Because that's just huge.
And I'm curious, I think there's a lot of people out there that maybe they really like the way they look and they say, I don't want to put on muscle. But part of the reason we want to do resistance training is to activate and to not lose what we already have. And I feel like that's part of it that people need to understand. Just because you're happy with where you are doesn't mean you're going to keep it. And then the other component is, if we're gaining strength, if we're gaining muscle, that's just going to up the ante. It's going to take our metabolic health higher than what our baseline is.
And inevitably, as you age, there is a certain point that you are going to lose strength and muscle. So you better, get as much as you can now. And it's, it is easier to. So even if you're younger and thinking, oh well, I don't care, but you're going to care in the future. And if you're older, it's even more important. So absolutely, the strength training, resistance training is such a key component that probably is going to have the biggest impact on a person's quality of life. So I love seeing that in people, and they just feel better, they look better, they're more confident. And the knock-on effect in terms of their health is huge. And then it makes it much easier if they want to lose weight, much easier, because the muscle is what burns fat. So absolutely, the resistance training. And again, on a practical level, and we went through this in our first podcast about eccentric training, 1 30-minute bout a week was the equivalent of 3 to 5 hours of traditional, both cardio and
so much
strength
time
training.
back.
So you can do very little. 10, 15 minutes, 3 times a week. I would recommend that for most people who haven't exercised before and they want to just dip their toe in the water. That would completely, you'll see huge changes just with that amount.
It seems to me like metabolic health, although it sounds very complicated and there's many components, it's not really that complicated to be healthy metabolically speaking. I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong and help me out here, but if we stop overfeeding ourselves, especially and boosting our insulin with all these super high sugary foods, if we stop doing that, if we stay active to activate our type 1 muscle fibers, and then if we do some sort of resistance training to keep and add muscle, we should be pretty metabolically healthy. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, and again, everyone's different, and that's why when we work people on an individual basis, there may be certain areas that we have to go into in a lot more detail. Because for some people, quite frankly, it could be emotional eating. It could be stress in their life. And if you don't deal with that, the rest of this doesn't matter. So, that's why we're big into the psychological component of health coaching, motivational interviewing, because it's really about helping people navigate, because we're in a world where our environment is working against us. Because obviously, if you do nothing, I can tell you what's going to happen, because we see all the data and stats. We talked about it, the increase in metabolic health issues, where you're not going to look better as good, feel as good, your energy will be worse, your mood levels will be worse. This is if you don't do anything to offset that environment that you're in, I see it like a mudslide that people are in. And quite frankly, the last 2 years, I feel like we've come off the edge of a cliff like lemmings. We're just following, and we just,
we are.
But if you can wake up out of that, wow, the potential is huge, and you will see it, feel it. And quite frankly, I mean, you will be an inspiration to other people. Because I've always found with just each person, just one person, if you take control of your own health and you can manage, and, like for some people it's easier, for some people it's harder. And, like I said, we've worked with so many people over the years, as everyone has different challenges. But if you can do that, for each person that gets healthier, the knock-on effect is at least 100 other people will probably end up healthier because of that person.
Wow.
Because they will be inspired, because a lot of even the psychological components called self-efficacy, your belief in yourself that you can achieve a goal. So if you see somebody else that can succeed, your self-efficacy jumps up. You go, well, if they can do it, well, maybe I can do it. And that's a huge component, because our biggest thing, I mean, we're big into nutrition, exercise, but quite frankly, the largest component of seeing changes in people's lives is the psychological one. So the two things that we focus on is increasing a person's motivation and their confidence, which is their self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, like I said, if you see someone succeed, and we obviously get great results, and we share those results with people, because then the knock-on effect is everybody else starts to get better results.
Yeah.
Because it becomes like this expectation. Well, yeah, if they...
Well, they can do it.
We
I
saw
can. All right.
Tushar dropped 65 pounds in the last year. He looks amazing. And now I just did a consultation this morning, and he just dropped 2 pounds a week over 6 weeks. So he dropped 12 pounds in 6 weeks, and fantastic. So it's brilliant from that point of view. If you can always focus on seeing the type of goals and who's achieved those goals, it just has this knock-on effect. So that's what I love about this, is that every single person that gets healthier and walks out of that lemmings line and doesn't fall off that cliff, they will inspire so many other people as well, which is fantastic.
Let me ask you this. So say I'm an average person, I'm a little bit overweight, and I adopt these lifestyle changes that you're talking about. I stop eating with the processed foods and taking in so much sugar. I'm going for walks a few days a week, and I'm doing, maybe 3 days a week of resistance training.
Yeah.
What kind of what kind of changes could I expect to see, and what amount of time? I feel like a lot of people have this 10 or 15 pound fat loss thing that they want to have, but it seems pretty impossible. And then there's others that need 60 or 70 pounds of fat, and that seems like it's going to be a lifelong goal when it's impossible. Could you speak just into how rapid these changes do occur? Obviously, everyone's different.
Yeah. That's the problem, is it is very individual. And like I said, some people will have a lot more challenges to overcome than others and have to work a lot harder. But I always try to reframe that for them and say, look, yes, it's more challenging for you, but then if you accomplish this, think of what that's going to do for you and your life and your self-efficacy. Because if you can overcome a bigger obstacle, well, then you're even stronger as a result of it. And I always find that has a knock-on effect in the rest of their lives, which is so, I always try to spin it as being a positive, because everybody has, challenges in their lives, of course, and it's all relative. But just to kind of give you maybe an outline for the average, I mean, look, to drop 10, 15 pounds for most people is very doable within a few months. Yeah. Very doable for most people. Again, like I said, there's always exceptions, and everyone has different challenges. But yeah, I mean, I always aim for most people that are looking for weight loss, for instance, 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss every week, roughly speaking. Some people might say that's quite aggressive and you should do it slower, but then I also notice that, again, from a motivational point of view, if it's too slow, it's very hard to stay motivated. So these things are a balance, and if you can do it in a healthy way where you're protecting their metabolism, nutrient density is another big thing, which we haven't talked a lot about, but I think we could do a whole separate episode on that.
Totally.
And obviously the exercise and all that kind of thing. So if you do it in a healthy way, I see people in their metabolic health and stuff, so absolutely they can do that. So that's the sort of results. But funnily enough, getting stronger and adding muscle if need be is even more important than losing fat, which is interesting. And even in the studies, that's starting to come up. So if you gain strength or muscle tissue, your metabolic health will get better rather than losing weight. So if you gain 2 pounds of muscle rather than lose 2 pounds of fat, there's no question that 2 pounds of muscle will have a much bigger impact on your metabolic health. And of course, quality of muscle, even without gaining muscle, improving the quality of your muscle, huge. So I always put that first. And I always try to talk to people, look, I know you're wanting to see the weight loss, and that's going to happen, no problem, but we got to focus on the strength and the muscle.
We talked about that in the last episode a bit, but I think the tendency is for people who want to lose fat, like, well, all right, well, hey, I'm going to get on the treadmill and I'm going to destroy myself until I see a bunch of fat come off, and then I'm going to go focus on the strength training and the resistance training. Yeah. But the problem is we're going to be losing too much muscle as we're losing fat, and that's going to mess up the metabolism in the long term again. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so they're all the things to kind of watch for. But I just think psychologically, like, I guess what I like to do is focus on, like I said, the overall environment is working against us. So try to create a mini environment for you to succeed. So, because I find, like, for instance, it would take more effort for me to eat unhealthy than healthy at this point, because I've got all these healthy habits. So it was funny because when we did the master class, we shot a video about ultra-processed food. So I had to go to the grocery store and get all the ultra-processed food. I was in the store for over an hour trying to find the stuff.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you just go in and you go to a certain shelf in a certain area and you just get used to eating what you're eating.
Yep.
So when I go, it's just almost automatic. I go and I get my, my vegetables and my proteins and my whatever, and natural and grass-fed, pasture-raised, all as much as I can. And it just becomes then, that's just how you shop, right? Yeah. So it would take me effort to try to figure out, okay, if I'm going to eat unhealthy, well, where am I going to go? Like, okay, I know I could stop in a fast food joint or whatever, but I just don't. So I don't even know exactly where they are. I'd have to think about it or look it up or whatever. So it's kind of funny. You create these habits on your surroundings. So I would always look at, okay, what is your surroundings? And if you can kind of change that, and that it's going to promote you and your health and your goals and your potential, it makes things much, much easier. So obviously, if you've got a fridge full of crap, get rid of it, fill it with health stuff. And then every time you go to the fridge, it's going to be easier to eat healthy stuff.
Absolutely.
Because you have to go out of your way to get the unhealthy stuff.
Absolutely.
I avoid advertising at all costs. So, I mean, I love like this now, Netflix and stuff, which got us away from all those advertisements. Because guess what, folks? Advertising works. And that's the other thing. Like, when you make these decisions and choices, you're also funding industries. So if you're eating ultra-processed food, well, a lot of those dollars go to marketing and advertising so they can get more customers and get more of the sales. So what you're doing inevitably impacts everybody else anyway. So like I said, when you actually, step out of that line, that mudslide, and take control of your health and start to tap into your potential, it's brilliant on a personal level. But by default, even if you don't care about anybody else, I hate to tell you, but you're going to have a positive impact on the rest of the world and society. Because
that one mean guy at home was like, dang it.
Yeah, so it's hard to be selfish, but so it works in both ways, because that's the way it is. And I just think it's about waking up, snapping out of this sort of, like I said, nightmare that people are in, and tapping into this immense potential that you have to have an incredible life. And like I said, it's not, you don't have to be crazy, because even with the diets, I just want to, one point I do want to make on that is that there does seem to be a lot of confusion, and people can go down, because you could watch a couple of documentaries and one documentary could be whatever, and then suddenly you're saying, well, it has to be all like vegan, or it could be low carb, and you watch that documentary and everything has to be keto and carbs are the enemy. So you can have these kind of extremes out there. But again, when you look at the change in diet over the last 200 years, there's a fantastic analysis that came out, I think in January of this year. If we have it, we'll put it in the notes. And it showed the change in diet in the last 200 years. Very, very well done, because they did good research, because they didn't have good records 200 years ago, but they're able to tap into the agricultural stuff and see exactly what was going on. And when you look at the changes, again, it's just that ultra-processed food. So there's, when people are like, oh, meat's going to kill you. Well, okay, well, it didn't kill us 200 years ago, and we didn't have metabolic health issues back then. So when you look at what the change in the food is, I use that as a bit of a framework. And then if there's these extremes saying, oh, this stuff is really bad, but in that time frame, our health hasn't really kind of, that is obviously not the cause of these health issues, then I'm going to be a little bit skeptical. So, be careful of those extremes. That's all I would say. And again, I think some things can be very useful for short periods of time. But yeah, so just be careful that you're not going down this pathway where you're going it's something that we never did before. You know? That can be tricky.
Awesome. Any parting words that you'd like to bestow upon the viewers here on metabolic health? And
yeah, watch Wally.
It's kind of scary. It's so real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, look, like I said, it's a choice. Of course, all these things are a choice, and I'm a big believer in it's up to each person. But really, like I said, if you think about your potential, you've got this immense potential, and it would just be a shame to get to the end and go, wow, I only operated at 5 or 10% of my potential. And by tapping into this, honestly, each little step that you take, you're going to get huge rewards out of that. And you really can do it. And we'll keep churning out the information to help people as much as we can.
Yeah, it's like take your freedom back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've sparked off another one, but I always see like being healthy as being a rebel more than the other way around. Most people think, oh, well, I don't want to have to eat healthy. That's just, bland or whatever. You're actually, when you like that freedom word, I think it's like being healthy is like being free. You're taking back control of your own health, and you're free to control your own body and mind, and
you're not controlled by food and things like everyone else. You're not a slave to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. But hopefully that's some useful tips in there for people.
I think there's a couple. Yeah, I think we got a couple useful tips. Well, guys, that's all for today. Thank you for watching the Resistance Podcast. Please like and subscribe if you want more content like this, and we'll be back next week with another podcast.
Yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thanks.